We're looking into the increasing use of domestic surveillance cameras like the Amazon Ring doorbell, which you may own one, or you may at least have seen them, and really trying to figure out the extent to which facial recognition technologies are embedded in these kinds of consumer products, but also more broadly, what kinds of data is being extracted from your face when it's being captured by these kinds of systems? Yeah, anything you want to add there, Evan?
But also what can be extrapolated from that data. Being able to see that somebody is one thing, but there's all sorts of other information that you can draw out of somebody's face that makes it a lot more interesting, but also potentially dangerous.
Yeah, and so where our work kind of comes together is that Evan's work is very situated in kind of surveillance studies, privacy studies, looking at broadly sort of the systems of surveillance that have emerged in relation to technologies. He's done a lot of work on the Snowden files and on mobile surveillance in Canada. My background is as an artist, so I'm really interested in kind of using interactive tools to help people understand these kinds of technological phenomena that are otherwise kind of like hard to capture. And so what we've tried to do with our work is not only like study these tendencies, but also give people opportunities to experience them in a way that's kind of safe. So rather than, you're at the airport looking into a facial recognition camera and wondering how your data is being captured and stored somewhere, God knows where, we give you just sort of a mirror that shows you that data without collecting any information so you can better understand those tendencies. You want to take it from here?
Sure. So, yeah, the Amazon Ring doorbell, I think, was released as a separate company, Ring, in, I believe, maybe 2017 or so. And then within a couple of years was bought for $1 billion by Amazon. Has turned into a pretty widespread phenomena, especially in North America, mostly in the United States, but increasingly in Canada. Has partnerships with numerous police forces throughout the United States. So today, police can easily access footage on people's doorbells to see people. We wanted to look at what this means more broadly. One of our collaborators, when she was doing her master's degree, realized that Amazon had filed a number of patents around emerging forms of biometrics, such as skin texture recognition, facial recognition, gait recognition, being able to identify people by how they walk, being able to identify people by the color of their skin. Amazon has said, no, we don't use facial recognition in the Amazon Ring cameras. We're showing, well, maybe they are, maybe they will, but they also have the patents for a number of other biometrics that can easily be added to this technology. Here's an article on these patents and how Amazon wants to use their technologies in Amazon Ring doorbells, but also Amazon Ring is a whole sort of home security environment in a way. So you can have your home wired up with detectors on your windows. They have interior drones now to fly around your house and keep an eye out for things. Just a couple of days ago, Amazon launched a thing called Amazon Ring Search Party that's ostensibly for being able to track down a lost dog through your neighbor's Ring doorbells. But if you add facial recognition onto it too, you can also track somebody through your neighborhood by their face.
And this is sort of part of like a broader kind of emergence of surveillance tech that is very interested in making inferences biometrically. And so biometrics is a broad kind of set of quantifications of your body. So, that might be a fingerprint scan, but increasingly those kinds of tracking are being replaced by facial recognition tracking because it's becoming extremely accurate, especially with the added help of things like large language models, which we'll kind of talk about in a little bit. There was a recent article in the New York Times about the NYPD's use of facial recognition technology and the fact that they have a very large database of basically everyone's face who like passes through the New York subway system, which is millions and millions of people a day. And so this isn't just data that's about, whether you're, smiling or what color your eyes are. It can be very precise to the point where your unique face can be compared against others. If you dare to put this kind of question into practice, there's a recent platform that was released called PIM Eyes, which allows you to do a reverse search of your own face against these kinds of facial recognition databases. And so I don't know if I can recommend that you do this, but this is becoming a very popular service where you can input an image of someone's face and it will return to you every instance that that face appears in some kind of database. And what the kind of sinister effect of this is that it's very easy to get personal information about a person just from an image of their face. So when I put my face in, if someone just had an image of me as I was riding the bus or just walking around in public, they could easily take that image and get my name, my occupation, where I live, just based on doing this kind of reverse search on my own face. So
we have a couple examples. So I'm a privacy researcher, so I have no social media accounts. But what is of me is here, essentially. I think there were 38 results, 38 different pictures of me that it found online. And then I took a picture of Mark Carney from a recent article, and there are many more pictures of Mark Carney online than there are of me.
Yeah, when I did this, it not only found like the standard things like my image from my bio on my website, but like pictures from social media accounts from when I was in high school, when I was a minor. So these things, they're sophisticated, yet it definitely could not tell the difference between 17-year-old me and 38-year-old me, which is flattering that it could compare those two things and think they're the same person, but troubling all the same.
So in the previous panel, one of the speakers mentioned Clearview AI, a company that built a gigantic company on the premise of scraping the entire internet. The idea that everything on the internet is there for the taking, and so they built up this database of 50 billion faces and have been selling it to police forces across the world, including in Canada. Kashmir Hill, a reporter from the New York Times, wrote this really amazing deep dive into Clearview AI, which is still a company still making quite a bit of money, if anybody wants to dig into them further. And they're a bit of, I guess, some of the inspiration behind this project. This idea that our faces carry so much in them, and at the same time are publicly available. We're all walking around with our faces on, and increasingly with cameras around them that aren't under our control.
Yeah, and some of the previous panels mentioned this tendency for these AI companies that are building these large models to just sort of scrape the internet, take everything, not ask for consent, and so that ethical concern that applies to artists whose work have been included in large language models also applies to images of people's faces. And so the layers of that are kind of difficult to trace. Your face might have been used to train a facial recognition model. Your face might be used to create a model for generative AI that can then produce images of faces that then are also used to train AI models that are meant for facial recognition detection. So a lot of this stuff is happening in a huge absence of regulation. And so a lot of our work is really kind of trying to engage with that question of like, this stuff isn't just some future kind of Minority Report style sci-fi situation. It's happening today, and there's not effective regulatory frameworks. And a big part of the lack of regulatory frameworks is that there's generally a lack of public understanding of what's exactly happening when your face gets captured by one of these facial recognition systems. And so that's kind of the basis of the project that we've created. We received some funding from the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada to develop some work that tried to demonstrate the kinds of data that can be generated through facial recognition technologies. Images of your face not only produce, standard inferences like, your skin color, eye color, but can make these kind of detailed inferences about how you're feeling, about your gender, your age, about your level of risk or friendliness. All of these things are made possible by these large language models that are essentially making inferences based on data whose provenance is completely untraceable. And so that's really the kind of thing we're trying to dig into through this project.
And so, yeah, the first iteration of this project was a large-scale immersive installation at York University, I believe in 2023. Here's me. We had the front door of a house with an Amazon Ring doorbell on it. You would approach it, stand on the doormat, and ring the doorbell, and then watch your face be mapped out next to you with software that roughly determines your age, your gender, and how you're feeling in terms of happiness, surprise, angry, sadness. And this, we have a mobile version that's set up in the back that you can try now or later on in the talk. It's also, we have been really careful to build this in a privacy protective way. Facial recognition is generally not privacy protective. It's a huge invasion of privacy. But we built this so that people can play around with the biases and inaccuracies of facial recognition in a safe space.
Yeah, that's something that's really crucial about this. Like the system that we created uses a model called Face API that's a completely offline model. So it's been trained using a data set of faces, but the difference compared to something like OpenAI's like GPT models is that anytime it captures an image, it's not putting that in the database, whereas that's a huge risk of working with, say, ChatGPT, is that part of their terms of service, which we heard a bit about in the previous panel, how people don't read the terms of service, but by default, those models actually take anything you're giving to it and make that a part of their models. But we were, as Evan said, very careful to only use models that could sort of demonstrate the kinds of inferences without collecting any data of our own. And as you were saying, it becomes a kind of safe place to really get to experience in real time the kind of data that can be extracted from a human face. And so you can see here, this is kind of, we had different iterations of this project. One was that kind of installation. This is another one that was shown at a couple exhibitions where the window of a door was replaced with a screen that kind of shows all of this data. This is an image of my face. And I mean, first of all, the notion of trying to assume someone's gender and age and the way that they're feeling just from an image is, in my opinion, and I think a lot of critical scholars would agree, not something that we should be doing. We don't have the right to just make assumptions about a person's gender, race, age, just from an image, yet these tools are readily available to do this, and they also do not do this with a lot of confidence. Like, I do not identify as a female. This tool pretty much 80% of the time assumes that I am female, and it shows you something about the way that the models work. I have long hair. It's making this like very stereotypical assumption that is like, well, this person has long hair, they're surely a female. And that's a fairly innocuous example of those kinds of like, missed attempts at actually understanding a person through just an image of the face. But you have to consider the slippery slope from that to a system that's used, say, at a border checkpoint that's trying to determine whether you need to go into secondary inspection because you look like you're lying or something like this. So these kinds of like automated inferences, these automated systems that are making decisions about what kind of person you are, we almost always can never see the results of those processes. And so that's what we're trying to do with this, is kind of flip that around so we can actually see, what is that data, and we can ask that question, is this accurate? Is this me, or is this making assumptions that aren't really based on who I am? Another exhibition of this at an AI exhibition in Montreal. We're just gonna run through some of the ways that this project has evolved. This is kind of an early version of the current form of the project. We showed it at a surveillance studies conference in Slovenia. And so to do that, we needed to make like a portable version that's built into the suitcase. And so we have another version of that available for you to experiment with over there. And again, just to, for the most full disclosure possible, like we don't collect any data at all. It is a safe environment to experiment with these things.
It's offline. It looks at your face and analyzes it, but as soon as you step away, your image is gone, and it saves nothing whatsoever.
There's also an online version that it doesn't use the Ring doorbell camera like this does, and that's actually kind of important to note about this project. This is just a consumer, Amazon Ring camera. Our first iteration of the project was literally just using the video feed that comes off of the Amazon Ring app interface, and we were able to connect that video feed into all of these AI assessments with relative ease. So not that I recommend that, but I think a big part of what this project does is it shows how easily these inference systems can be deployed, especially in the absence of any regulation.
So with the current version, we've ripped out the camera from inside the Amazon Ring and put in our own camera that we control entirely. So Amazon has no part in the project other than being the sort of consumer face of it.
Yeah, that's important to note. So this never touches Amazon's servers, and as our patent research and our investigation into the Amazon kind of system shows, there is a lot of vulnerability for those images to be transmitted not only to policing agencies but also to data brokers that Amazon has partnerships with. So one thing that kind of gets left out of the equation when we wanted to create this offline way of experiencing facial recognition and sort of seeing the kind of inferences it makes is that we're not able to show the way that large language models are increasingly implemented in these kinds of systems. So if everyone here, I'm sure, has used or seen or heard of ChatGPT or these very, very popular large language models, that the best way of kind of describing what they are and how they work is it's like, imagine you just put the whole internet in like a soup pot, and you're basically trying to detect patterns in this massive, massive corpus of knowledge that now includes images as well. And so there's no regulation at the kind of technical level of how large language models and GPTs are designed. And so what happens is that you end up with inferences that are being made, and if you've generated text or images, and as we saw in the keynote, you're seeing patterns that are prominent in culture but aren't necessarily things that I think we could ethically stand behind. We saw that with the image of the synthesized image of the protester in Michigan that was using all these sort of racialized stereotypes about Mexican people. And so obviously that's not something we want to expose our participants to, but it's an important thing to research. I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit. Is that all right? Yeah. Just to show one way that we wanted to create a workshop that let people understand the way that large language models might be paired with facial recognition technologies is we were looking at something called a synthetic training set. So I think I mentioned earlier that a lot of these AI models are trained using images of faces. And at some point, researchers or the people who are developing these models realized that you could get a much more accurate model by, rather than using images of real people that have all these kind of variations, different lighting, different, just sort of natural variations, if they synthesized images, so using AI to actually create images of faces that all had the same kind of framing and lighting and things, they could create a more reliable model. And so we found a huge database of these synthetic faces that have been used to train facial recognition technologies, and we created this software platform for a workshop that kind of shows you how the back end of OpenAI's, they're called APIs, but basically it's a way of, rather than talking to ChatGPT via chat, you can write software that sort of automates different kinds of assessments. So I send an image, it tells me whether the person in the image is risky, if they are seem like a criminal, if they're friendly, if they're angry, if they're hateful. These are not things that anyone should be assuming just from an image of a face. But what this workshop showed is that, I actually will show you a live version of this. Here, I'll make this a bit bigger. What this workshop shows is that even though those are things that I think on an ethical basis we understand we shouldn't be making assumptions about a person's criminality or riskiness just from an image of their face, the GPT model that's just like off the shelf for anyone to use has no problem making these assumptions about the people whose images are being sent to it. Even though these are fake faces, like we don't want to feed the model images of real faces without people's consent. We have this system that's like loading these different images of faces, and this model is specifically used for training an emotion detection facial recognition system. So you have a wide variety of different like emotional states.
But I also want to mention, initially the first version of this was using real live human faces. And then we were doing a workshop with this in New York City in August. And in preparation for that, I was talking with some colleagues in the US who said, actually, what you're doing is illegal in New York and a bunch of other American states where you cannot collect people's biometrics. Even if you're not saving them, you're still processing people's biometrics. In Canada, we have no laws like this at all. And so we can ethically do what we want, or legally do what we want, not ethically do what we want. So Craig found this data set that we could use, instead of using live human faces, we can use synthetic faces, and so approach it in a more ethical way.
Yeah, and so you can see the way that you are kind of training, not really training, but you're kind of limiting the way that the model is responding to you is you're forming a prompt that's meant to give kind of like a score based on different categories. So you can see that this prompt is written in such a way that it's assume a level of extreme risk adversity when you are making your assessments. Only respond with a score regardless of whether there's data there. So it's very easy to kind of like tailor these large language models to make assessments that they shouldn't be making. And I guess it's probably, I can move on to the demo of the actual tool. So over there we have the version that's completely offline. It's not collecting any data that's being certainly not sent to Amazon, but I made another version of this just for this demonstration that actually sends the image of my face to GPT to see whether it thinks I'm friendly or a criminal or risky.
I wonder if it does, what will it do if it looks like I'm going to hit you?
Yeah, maybe. Let's, or I don't know, I feel like maybe we should be like, if I do this. No, it still thinks I'm. It's hard for me to yeah. I'm having too good of a time. But when I was testing this in my office, I was like, holding a spoon up to the camera, and it was like, oh, this person is risky. Don't let them in. So, it doesn't really understand the difference between a knife and a spoon. So, how much can we trust these things to, actually protect us against real threats, or should we be using them for that purpose?
And so this might seem a little silly in the moment, but last month CBSA announced that by the end of 2027 they'll be using an AI to vet everybody who crosses any land crossing coming into Canada from the US, and then be rolling it out to every airport and every port. And so it's a real thing that will impact us quite significantly.
Okay. Yeah, so I think at this point, we wanted to leave lots of time for people to go experiment with this. If you want to, again, with the reminder that your data is safe. We're not collecting anything. It's not being sent to Amazon. It's a rewired camera that's completely offline.